Alrighty, so I would like to dig into our topic. And today I decided to talk about, um, really to talk about foreshadowing, or how I like to think of it is tracking elements, different story elements, in order to create that surprising but inevitable conclusion. And really, we're talking about the climax. The climax is this really it's such a fun moment in a story, but it can be hard to get it right because essentially you've got all of these plot lines and then they just come to a single point, like they just snap together at the climax. And again, especially if you've done it right, because the climax is where everything should come together. You don't really want to be having like a running climax where this story concludes and then never gets spoken of again, and this story concludes and never gets spoken of again. You really want it to look like, um, you know, major crisis. They get up to, they get up to the refusal moment where they say, "I just can't do this anymore," and they come up with a new plan. So that's the climax and the really the flip point for that internal story, for the internal belief shift that needs to happen. From there, they make a new plan. They start to execute the plan. There's usually some sort of twist that's going to force them to regroup, kind of recommit, and really sort of show that they've very deeply committed to the new belief in order for them to take massive action and succeed. So that's climax in a nutshell. But what also needs to be coming in at that time is all of the subplots, all of the little recurring pieces. So whether it's an object, a person, um, some element of the world building, maybe something about how a magic system works or a political system works. All of these things are going to be showing up at the same time, and kind of everything flips at the same time. And um and it's so impressive. I mean, we know what that's like when we read that and when it's done well. But when it's when it's not done well, um we can we can have a little bit more mediocre ending, a little bit less satisfying ending, maybe not even less satisfying, but just not as impactful, not as memorable as it should be. And what we always want to be creating is that kind of like holy wow moment for our readers. We want to really not just satisfy them, but excite them and really keep them thinking about that climax for a period of time after, so that they go on and buy the next book, right? That's the whole name of the game. So the question is, how do you do that? And it's not magic. You can backwards engineer this pretty easily, and you can backwards engineer the surprise into it as well. And for me, of course, I've been preparing the plotting workshop this week, which is going to be happening next weekend. And have really been thinking about how do we build a plot? How do we build everything so that it coalesces together? And how can you do it in a simple, straightforward manner? And for me, it really comes down to, I want to know what happens in that climax. And I want to see all of the pieces that are going to come together. And so then once I know all of the pieces that are going to be coming together in that climax, then I can start working them backwards. And so I want to run through a few examples. And the big one that I always go to is the Hunger Games. And if you remember, at the climax of that, there are these poison berries, and the whole climax actually depends on these poison berries. And so the poison berries are a recurring element. They don't have, they're an object. They don't have a plot of their own. They're not a subplot, but they are this thing that shows up repeatedly. And of course, you need something to show up repeatedly so that when you get to the climax, you're not just introducing something new. You're not having that hand of God, Deus Ex Machina showing up all of a sudden. So you need to have this thing sort of laid in there beforehand, but you also need to make sure that it is surprising. Because if you, I would say, if right at the outset, it was obvious what you were going to do with the berries or with whatever object is in your story, I mean, it's not going to make for a very exciting conclusion. We need to have that surprise in there. And the way that you do that is you make sure that you are introducing the element, but in different ways. You are using that element to showcase other parts of the story. So let me show you again with this example what I mean. So very often, and of course, Chekhov's gun, everything that's going to show up in the third act needs to be introduced in the first act. So the berries or whatever it is that you are using in your story, the berries show up in the first act. And they show up in such a minor way that you don't even really think about them. What they're really doing is they're adding flavor. We're learning that Katniss Everdeen, the protagonist, is knowledgeable about plants. She's knowledgeable about the things that you can eat in the woods and the things that you can't eat in the woods. Very important for her survival. And really, it's painted initially as her ability to survive. It's painted as it's really painted as part of her backstory, part of her everyday struggle. So how is this thing that's going to show up in the climax part of their everyday struggle? And not in a direct way, not in an obvious way, but how does it really just add a little bit of flavor? How are we using it to show something about the character, to show something about the world? And so, of course, that very, very minor touch point, and it's really buried in the Hunger Games example. It's really buried because we're told it at the same time as Katniss is presented with kind of an option to run away into the woods and survive. And it's just presented as, we could do this. We could run into the woods and survive because what types of plants are okay to eat. That's sort of it. And it really gets buried. You don't even think about it that much because you're so, your attention has been drawn so much to the other things going on in the story. But it's still there. It's still a piece that you file away into your old memory bank about this. And so we always want to be making sure, if we've got something that's going to show up at the end of a story that's going to be important for the climax, we make sure that we are introducing it in a very low tension, very low impact way back in Act 1. And then as we get into Act 2, 2A, 2B, we're starting to maybe add a little bit more tension to it. We're starting to be a little bit more obvious if we follow the berries through. We see again that Katniss has this knowledge of plants. We actually see the berries themselves for the first time when they're in the training facility. But again, that's presented in a way that is more about Peta showing his support for her and her rejecting that. And she really focuses on what does Peta's support mean? She doesn't focus on, hey, these berries are poisonous. These berries could kill someone. She really doesn't focus there. It's sort of brushed off again. And it's used to build tension between the characters. It's used to build a little bit more tension in a different subplot. And so it's always about burying this information under other things. It's about directing the reader's attention elsewhere. Because, of course, your character has everything that they need to succeed right from the beginning. They just don't believe it yet. And they're being tested repeatedly throughout the story, or they're being shown repeatedly throughout the story that they do have everything that it takes, um, but fail to believe it. They fail to embrace that, and they actually interpret everything in the wrong way. So again, through Act 2, we're still showing this item, this element that's going to show up at the end, um, probably with kind of a mid-level tension associated with it, but still using it to add flavor and to show other subplots, to show other elements, to really, again, just sort of show and add background or add credibility to the things that they're thinking about the other characters, the things that they're thinking about the story problem, the things that they're thinking about completely, totally other things. Um, and then, of course, in the climax, and you can do this multiple times. And it's not until the climax that you really show up um, and make it obvious what this item is going to do, right? It's not until she's just about to use the berries. Katniss doesn't even have the thought of what she's going to do with these berries until about a second before she pulls them out and uses them for her epic her epic success, or her epic fight against the Capitol. So again, it's really just about burying it under other things and then flipping it at the end. And we can do that with objects. We can do that with other people. We can do that even with beliefs. So we look at other people. What example do I want to use here? If we look at something like subplot where one of the subplots that really comes out at the conclusion of the Hunger Games is this sort of weird, sort of quasi fake relationship between Peta and Katniss, and of course that is foreshadowed way in the beginning. Of course, we've got Peta who shows up as the second tribute, again right at the beginning. I can't even remember if maybe she thinks something about the baker before. If she thinks something about the baker during the setup, even before then. But Peta all of a sudden is there, and then they have the interviews, and she's mad at him for telling everyone that he has this crush on her. And so the focus is not on the relationship. The focus is on her anger at him and what she interprets it to mean. The focus continues to be on really Katniss's thoughts, the way that Katniss interprets things. It really is drawing the reader's attention to very different things, up until the very end when we see how dedicated she is, how willing she is to put her life on the line to try to save Peta as well. So we can use subplots like that where we're just redirecting the attention, redirecting what someone is, what a reader is interpreting out of something, and what a character is interpreting out of something, redirecting up until the very last minute when we show them the flip, we show them the truth of how it's going to be used. So again, objects, subplots. We can also have, if you've got something like an ensemble cast where you've got multiple people having their storylines. Often a minor character's storyline will wrap up before the big climax. But really what's happening is that they are, when their story wraps up, they have a change of heart. They have their own epiphany, their own belief shift. And that prepares them to show up the way that they need to in the climax. So for the main character, the main story, they're doing this and this and this, and they've got this problem happening at the climax, and they need to show up for it. And all of a sudden, it's they're surprised, or the reader is surprised that this maybe formerly stick in the mud character has had a change of heart and is there and is ready to fully take on the challenge, take on the adventure. And so we can do that as well. And that's a very interesting concept, because that subplot does wrap up earlier, but then the resolution really is seen in how that can build the actual, or how that can make them successful at the actual climax. So lots of things to think about with adding in subplots, adding in these recurring elements, and just being really aware when you are constructing your story idea and you're constructing your plot, recognizing, what is that climax? What is actually going to happen? And what elements need to be present in order for that to work. And from there, working backwards and building those subplots. And you're really asking yourself, how can this be used, or how can this either element or subplot be used to showcase other aspects of the story, which will then help you figure out how you're going to foreshadow it earlier in the story.